families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Families Divided TV. In this episode, Dr. Chip Chimera, an experienced family therapist in the UK, describes her work with families in high conflict where a child is refusing to see a parent. Explaining ideas from systemic family therapy, modern attachment, and trauma theory, Chip highlights the work of success and failure in seeming intractable situations. She explains the theory and illustrates her work with a case example. We'll be right back with Dr. Chip Chimera right after these important messages.
Divorce and co-parenting are a major life interruption for families, especially the kids, but also for parents and grandparents. And it's even worse in blame-filled, high-conflict cases. When parents engage in alienation by turning the kids against the other parent or grandparents, kids suffer. They're denied the opportunity to build the 4 big skills necessary for future resilience. New Ways for Families online class can help. Parents learn to use our popular BIF and EAR skills to calm the conflict and stop the hostile emails and texts. And we even have a class for kids and parents to learn together. Research shows a 75% improvement in joint parental decision-making after this course is taken, plus overall improvements for kids' well-being. Don't wait to make this affordable investment in your children's future and improve your well-being too. Start learning new ways for your family today at conflictplaybook.com.
Hello. Hi, I'm Chip Chimera, and I'm happy to be here today to be talking to you about working with the trauma of alienation. I'd like to just say a few words before we begin about what I'm going to try and do this afternoon or today. Okay, so first I'm going to talk a bit about where I come from theoretically and introduce myself a bit. And then I'm going to talk a bit about trauma, what it is and what it isn't. And then I'm going to talk quite a lot about the things that I use, the tools that I use, which are attachment-based, and how I work with that. So I use attachment, I use systemic family therapy, and I use trauma theory. So I am a systemic family therapist, and I integrate ideas I integrate systemic ideas with modern attachment theory and modern trauma theory as well. And I use a particular form of systemic therapy called attachment narrative therapy. And I am also a trauma specialist. I have recently trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, as some people will know. And it is it's specifically aimed at working with trauma. I have a lot of appreciation to give to my colleagues who have been so instrumental in helping me to develop and been so inspirational. And they are namely Melanie Gill, my friend and colleague who's a psychologist, Professor Rudy Dallas, Pat Crittenden, who developed the model of attachment I'm going to produce and talk to you about, and John Bing Hall, who was a systemic family therapist who brought attachment ideas into systemic work and is no longer with us, sadly, but was a great inspiration to me. So I'm going to move on to talk about trauma, okay, and the distinction between trauma and danger. So many people think that an event that happens is a traumatic event, but in the way we work, we think of trauma as being a reaction, a response to a dangerous event. The dangerous event in itself is not trauma, is not traumatic, but it's how we respond to it that makes it a trauma. Now, with the alienator family, the attachment figure, so there's a dangerous event, and then within the alienator family, the attachment figure who should protect me has caused me and continues to cause me danger. And they might exaggerate that danger, and they send me into that danger. Within the targeted family, the attachment figure who should protect me is untrustworthy. They've been designated as untrustworthy, and they're not available, or they're unwilling to protect me, or they may even be unaware of the danger. So as an unprotected child, I'm going into a situation in which there is continuing fear, there's arousal, there's dysregulation of my mind, my body. I cannot think, I cannot sit still. I may be having either withdrawn right into myself, or I may be acting out in a very dangerous and perhaps even violent way. And I'm constantly in that fight, flight, freeze state of arousal. What happens is that my frontal lobes shut down, my cerebral cortex is not accessible to me, I cannot think. And I have very limited ability to solve problems, and I have reduced ability to reflect, to think about what's going on, and there's a heightened risk of further trauma, further reactions or further responses, which are traumatized responses. So what do I need? I need a secure base. And that's where attachment comes in. That's where secure attachment comes in. And I've got here a quote from John Bowlby, for which I'm eternally grateful to Rudy Dallas for bringing to my attention and for continually teaching it. And it's something that Bowlby said in 1973. And I'm just going to read you the quote. He says, "For not only young children, it is now clear, but human beings of all ages are found to be at their happiest and to be able to deploy their talents to best advantage when they are confident that standing behind them are one or more trusted persons who will come to their aid should difficulties arise. The person trusted provides a secure base from which his or her companion can operate." So it's not only something that happens with babies or children or teenagers, but it follows us right through the life cycle. And I think that that is really crucial and important information for us to take on board. Human beings of all ages. And he talks about being able to deploy their talents. So being able to explore their environment, being able to engage with their environment, being able to use themselves in the way that is most effective for them. When they're confident that standing behind them, so they're to be accessed if needed, so not far away, but accessible, is one or more trusted people. And that word trust becomes so crucial when we're thinking about alienation and when we're thinking about how to repair alienation. And that trusted person provides that security, that secure base, so that you know, those of us in relationships that are working well, we know that we're not always on the same page. We sometimes come off the rails, things get derailed and taken off track. But I know, for instance, that my husband will always have my back, no matter what. Even if we're having a row about something, if there's a danger that appears, he will be there for me, and vice versa. I will be there for him. Okay. So the secure base is really crucial when we're thinking about attachment and thinking about how to help these children and families where there is such a severe damage to the security and to their trust. Okay. So I want to tell you about the dynamic maturational model of attachment. And this is a model that has been developed by Dr. Patricia Crittenden, and it's based on research with at-risk populations. People may not know that there is more than one model of attachment. John Bowlby developed the ideas around attachment, and then they went out into the world, and researchers and academicians, I should say, worked with them and developed new ways of thinking about them and expanded them. Okay. Now, Patricia Crittenden has done her work on families where there has been risk. So her model focuses on how we respond to danger. How do we get our attachment figure to stay close to us when we're in danger? It's been used in court assessments and is quite frequently used in court assessments here in the UK. I use it. And it's been researched across cultures. So it's been researched internationally and across many, many cultures. So the underlying premise of the DMM, shorten the dynamic maturational model, it's the dynamic maturational model of attachment and adaptation. And the premise underlying it is that we all develop behavioral strategies to stay safe and to get protection from danger. That our main motivation in life is to get to maturity so that we can reproduce, and hence the survival of the species. So it's very important that we stay out of danger, and that we have protection from danger, and that we get comforted in order to keep ourselves safe. So the DMM tries to understand how the person protects themselves and how their strategy for self-protection develops. And there are a number of strategies, which I'll show you. So this is the model. This is the circumplex model. And the DMM is divided into A, B, and C. It's quite a complex model, so I'm not going to go through the whole 5-day course of it right now, and I'm not going to try to. But basically, what it says is that there are 3 basic ways of staying safe, okay? So Mary Ainsworth, who was a student of Bowlby's and a colleague of Bowlby's, and who did a major piece of research into attachment, went and studied attachment actually in Africa. And she wrote to Bowlby and said, I've got 3 groups of children. Okay, one group is absolutely perfectly fine. She was looking at separation and reunion. Okay, so infants and toddlers up to the age of about 18 months, 2 years, where they were separated from their parent, usually their mother, and then they returned. And she was looking at what happened on the reunion. And she wrote to Bowlby and said, I've got 3 groups of children. One group is perfectly fine. Their mothers go, they don't show much emotion or feeling. Their mothers come back and they don't show much emotion or feeling, but they're glad to see them and they greet them and they just carry on. I've got another group who's sort of okay. Their mothers leave and they get fussy. They protest. They don't like it. And when their mothers come back, they might also protest a bit, and they might also be a bit cross and angry, and sometimes a bit fussy. And then I've got a third group who really aren't all right at all. They come back, their mothers go away, and then when the mothers come back, they're very distressed and they arch their back and they don't want to be picked up, and they're angry with their mother and they might even hit her. So John Bowlby said, well, let's not label these 3 different ways of thinking about attachment until we understand what they mean. So let's call them A, B, and C. And that's how this A, B, and C came about. So Pat's dynamic maturational model is divided into A, B, and C. And there are different kinds of A's, there's different kinds of C's, and there's different kinds of B's. Most of us will fit on this model from the midpoint. If we bisect the model horizontally, most of us will fit on it above that, okay? So we'll either go from sort of A3 across to C3. And so we'll go through there's 5 kinds of secure, B, secure. We now know these as avoidant, secure, and ambivalent. Okay. And what we know about those children who looked perfectly fine is that they weren't perfectly fine. What they had done was they had disregarded their negative feelings. They had come to understand, not intellectually, but through their body and through the way that they were interacted with, that they needed to repress their negative feelings. So the negative feelings of anger, fear, and anxiety were pressed down so that they didn't show them, because showing them might drive their attachment figure further away. On the other side, the C side, they had learned that unless they made a lot of noise, unless they really demanded the attachment figure's attention, they were likely to not get it. And they had very inconsistent parenting. So on the A side, the parent was consistently unavailable. So the child had to lower their arousal level. On the other side, the parent was inconsistently available. Sometimes they were there, sometimes they were not. And so those children learn to exaggerate their emotions. So anger, blaming, it's all your fault. The other person is all to blame, and I'm the victim here. And that kind of brings resentment. The A side inhibit emotions, they inhibit anger, they take responsibility for themselves. It's all my fault. I must have done something wrong. And they blame themselves. And shame comes with that. Okay, so we're going to go on to think about how in the work that I do, what we try and do is locate the person's strategies somewhere on this circumplex model, so that we can find out how to sort of resonate with them, get next to them, understand what they're doing to stay safe, and work with that. So if someone is very much on the A side, inhibiting their feelings, the help that they need, what they're good at, firstly, what they're good at is the thinking about things, thinking about the consequences of things. If this happens, then that will happen. Or when this happens, then that might happen. What they're not so good at is their guts, feeling what it means to them. So you join them in their cognitive strategy, in their thinking strategy, and you help them to think about, well, what might that feel like? What might that be experienced as? On the other side, on the C side, they're really good at feelings. They can emote away. But what they're not so good at is the thinking about the consequences, or the thinking things through, the critical thinking. So we join them in their feelings. That must have been awful for you. I can just, I can really understand how bad that felt. And then you help them to get into their heads, to think about what the consequences are of things. Working therapeutically with families. So in a traditional family therapy, preparation work is minimal. Okay. So I've been a family therapist now for over 40 years. And yes. And the idea about family therapy is you just get them together, you get the family together, you talk it out, and it'll all be fine. You get them to communicate with each other, and it'll all be fine. So preparation work is minimal. There's a referral, you invite the family in, on you go. Then you set the goals, and the goals that you set are often very common goals within the family. They want to get on better. They want to communicate better. Very often, families will say, we just want to communicate better. We have trouble with communication. So you can work on that. You can set some goals for intervention. And you meet with the whole family. So you gather the whole family together, and then you decide what you're going to do next. And you might then continue to meet with the whole family, or you might meet with subsystems. You might meet with the parent and child, one parent and one child subsystem. You might meet with the parents as a subsystem. You might meet with the sibling subsystem, or grandparents, or whatever. You might break it down, but you would start with the whole family wherever that's possible. And when people are attached, positively attached to each other, I won't say securely, but positively attached to the extent that they can set goals to be together, they want to get along better, then the presence of the other is calming, it's regulating. We help each other to regulate. So the presence of each other is calming. And there's the ability to think, to put yourself in the other person's shoes, to imagine what it's like to be in that position. So it's mentalization. It's the ability to mentalize other members of the family is there. And generally speaking, the impact on the participants, if it's good therapy, is positive. If the therapist is doing their job right, the participants feel helped and they go away feeling better. Okay. Therapy and alienation work is a bit different. So preparation is more complex. So it's not, you can't just jump in with both feet. You need to think about how to start it. There needs to be some warm up. Okay. And I now spend quite a lot of time sending out my terms and conditions, which explains the way that I work, which says there's no guarantee of a positive outcome. You know, there's no outcome is guaranteed, positive or negative. But I often spend the first session and maybe even the first two sessions going over what it means to be in therapy, what you can expect from the conversations, what my expectation is of how people will be in those conversations, what's going to be helpful for the child. And I try and keep it very child focused. But the preparation work itself is quite complicated. Common goals are very limited. It's not easy. And in fact, quite often it's impossible to really set common goals. People may say that they want to get on better, but in fact, there's usually, and people watching this will know, that there are usually differing goals. So one person might really want just to see their child again, and the other person might just want that other person to go away underneath it all. And so you're never sure whether you're really working with compliance or whether you've really got people who've bought in to what the goal of therapy is. And meeting with subsystems. So I would start by meeting with each parent individually. And then I would put the subsystems together. And then I might not meet with the children until it's psychologically safe for them to meet with the children, with their parents. I might meet with them individually with each parent, but putting the mother, the father, and the child together in a therapeutic situation would need some careful consideration. Okay. And the opposite of in an ongoing family where there's positive attachment, in a family where there's been this fracturing of attachment and where there are attachment wounds, where people feel very hurt and angry and upset, the actual physical presence of the other is often very disturbing. So it's dysregulating. People fall apart. They lose their ability to think. All of those things that happen within our brains when we feel that we're in danger kick in and we become dysregulated. So there's an inability or a distorted ability to mentalize other members of the family. And often that comes with an attribution of negative qualities. He always wants to hurt me. She never does what she says she's going to do. Yeah, you know the types of things. And the impact, finally, the impact on the participants is not guaranteed to be positive. It can be varied, and it may, in fact, be damaging. So one has to be very careful when one is working with traumatized families and with families where alienation has occurred, so that we don't do more damage. First, do no harm. So how do we assess for therapy? I often do an intervention called the adult attachment interview. And this is a reflective, I do it with both parents separately. And it's a reflective interview on the adult's experience of being parented. So how they grew up, what their attachments were like, what their relationships were like with each parent and their siblings, if they have them, and the extended family members. So it's a semi-structured interview. It gets recorded, and then that recording gets transcribed. So it's quite a complex process. And then that transcription gets coded. So the questions about relationships, the questions are about relationships and about relationships with each parent and with the parental relationship. I'll probably say a bit more about this later, but the parental relationship also has an impact on children have a relationship with their parents' relationship. And it also reveals during the process, there are a lot of questions about danger, about what happens when, and traumas and dangers can be revealed. So it will reveal times when the child when the person as a child experienced danger, and it will also reveal when those dangers had become traumas and whether or not those traumas are resolved. And it identifies the person's attachment strategies. Life is full of danger, even for the most protected of children. They fall over, they skin their knees. That's a danger. They, I don't know, they break an ankle or they do something. They can become ill. That's a danger. But it's how we respond to those dangers and how our attachment figures look after us that are important. And it identifies the person's attachment strategy. I should say strategies because we have different strategies for different situations. Every strategy has a context. Okay, so if you can remember that circular model, the A, B, and the C, this next slide shows the attachment strategies for maintaining the attachment and for fostering change. So where you have people on the A side, the dismissing, they tend to speak in a way that focuses on actions and facts, and they have the avoidance of emotion. They might talk about feeling a little bit angry. They tend to minimize things. They might say, well, I was sort of annoyed. Yeah, they tend to not to downplay feelings. And in order to foster change, encourage change, what we do, as I said earlier, is to encourage the exploration of feelings and the expression of emotion. Okay. So we're thinking about feelings. On the far side, the preoccupied side, we acknowledge and validate the emotions and feelings. There are people on that side who use the preoccupied strategies, who use the C strategies. And by the way, we never talk about a C person. We talk about a person who uses a C strategy, or in this situation, they use a C strategy. So we acknowledge those feelings, and they tend to exaggerate the feelings. I was so angry, I thought I was going to explode. I was so sad that I thought I was just going to disappear. Those kinds of, really vivid images that exaggerate the feelings, and very often you get drawn in and you can feel it with them. Okay. For those people, we want to encourage the focus on the events. Okay, so tell me what happened and try and get it into an order. Let's think about the sequences and the causes. So we're focusing there on cognition, what helps them to think. So For A strategies, we want to get them into their guts. For C strategies, we want to get them into their heads. Okay, and then in the middle, where you've got the B strategies, someone using a B strategy can do both. Okay, they can acknowledge emotions and cognitions. They can do both thinking and feeling. So they can describe things in a way that gives you a full sense of the narrative of what happened, how they felt about it, what the outcome was, and how they feel about that, and what the consequences are. And then we encourage awareness of conflicts, and we foster integration. So it's really learning from your experience and what are you going to do different? What are you going to carry forward differently? Okay. Coming on to thinking about systemic ideas, I'm going to sort of transition now, leave attachment behind slightly, and come into triangles, thinking about triangles in systemic thinking. So the concept of triangulation was identified very early on in the development of family therapy. And we thought in family therapy, there'd been a lot of focus on the dyad, and certainly in attachment work, there's been a lot of focus on the dyad. And what we like to think about in systemic is the triad, the triangle. And it was thought that the triangle was the basic unit of understanding for consideration of families, not the dyad. Murray Bowen talked about the triad being the stable unit. Okay. Later, in the 1970s, this idea about rigid triangles was described. It was described by Salvador Minuchin, where each parent demands that the child side with them against the other parent. And whenever the child sides with one, he's automatically defined as attacking the other parent. So the child becomes paralyzed. That was Salvador Minuchin's idea about rigid triangles. Again, this is based on clinical work and with at-risk populations. Okay. Then in the 1980s, that development continued into the concept of the perverse triangle, which would generate a pathological system. This was identified by J. Haley. It was a pathological system was one that resulted in continual conflict. And I guess people watching this will be very aware of pathological systems. And the characteristics of a pathological system and a pathological triangle are that one member of the triangle is from a different generation. This generates an imbalance of power. It's a parent-child power imbalance. Parent has far more power than the child, even though it may seem that the child is very powerful. That two members of the triangle form a coalition against the other member of the triangle, but that coalition is denied. Of course, I want him to have a relationship with his mother. Of course, he should go and see his father. It's nothing to do with me. Talk to the child. So the coalition is denied. And that coalition, if it's going to be a perverse triangle, it persists over time, and in that becomes rigid. We all might have moments where, go tell your father, okay? But it's really important, this idea about it persisting over time, so that you don't even need to, you can just raise your eyebrows and the system will go into action. So just thinking about attachment as a triadic process. So you've got the mother and the father and the child. And in this slide, you can see that the child has a relationship, maybe even a good relationship with the mother, maybe even a good relationship with the father, but there's conflict and stress between the mother and the father. So the child has a relationship to the parents' relationship. So that will have a huge impact on the child's attachments. Okay. So the attachment dilemmas that the child faces are, I'm protective of my parents. I need to protect my parents so that they can protect me because I'm a dependent child and I need adults to look after me. And my parents are stressed and they're distressed, and I don't want to add to their problems. But then I'm on my own with my problem. So that's a very lonely place to be. But my problems seem to be adding to my parents' distress. So it becomes very, very entangled, and the child cannot separate themselves out from what is happening between their parents and what is happening to them. So it's harder for the parents to resolve their own dynamics and their own distresses because the child is imposing themselves into that and being imposed into it too by the parents. And so what's the way out? Well, I might just get myself a diagnosis. I might develop ADHD or autistic spectrum disorder, or I might get an eating disorder. That might distract them enough so that they can sort out their conflict and stress. Or I might start stealing things, breaking things, slamming doors, taking doors off hinges. I slam them so hard, as I've got one teenager doing at the moment. So what can't be said in this situation is this my fault? Which of you is right? You're telling me one thing, one's telling me one thing, one's telling me the other. How am I supposed to understand this? What does my connection with my father mean? And you might be able to say, what does my connection with my mother mean? What does it mean to the two of you? And in these situations, often there's no narrative. There's no story about how the family came to be the way it is. There's no understanding of what on earth happened. So it's very often that the child then thinks it must be my fault. Somehow, there was one thing we as family therapists like to do is to, you know, explain to the child that, they're the product of, usually, if it's true, they're the product of a loving relationship. There was a time when your parents really loved each other. So where does that leave the kid? Well, okay. So everything was all right until I came along, and then it all went wrong. So it must be my fault. So the impact of all of this is the splitting into black and white, that dichotomous thinking. One must be right, the other wrong. And I can't cope with any shades of gray. And the child can be conscripted into take sides. And this idea about ambiguous loss, and ambiguous loss is that sense of it's lost, but the person is lost, but they're not gone. So they're not dead. They haven't completely disappeared. They're still around somewhere, but they're out of touch, out of reach. They're no longer standing behind the person. They are invisible and unreachable. And it brings about this sense of ambiguous loss, and there's no way of getting closure on it. There's no ritual, there's no funeral, there's no way of understanding it. And so the best thing to do is to just cut off, just cut off. That's ambiguous loss. And then we have therapy as a process of reorganization. And we would hope that that is what could happen during the process of therapy. I wanted to say something about the double bind. We often use this word double bind, and it describes a process where no matter what you do, it's wrong. Okay. So here's a triadic view of the double bind in the alienating process. Firstly, this was first identified by Gregory Bateson and his team back in the 1950s. And they would notice that where they were doing research into the communication processes where one member of the family had a mental illness like schizophrenia, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And they would notice that there was two levels of message. So there would be one overt message, which would be, come and give your mother a hug. This is described in his book, Steps to an Ecology of Mind. Come and give your mother a hug. But then there'd be another message, which was covert and more physical, and but not spoken, which would be a sort of shrinking away. So that message was actually, I don't really want you to touch me. But the person was unable to say, to ask for clarification, unable to say, Mother, you're telling me to give you a hug, but then you're pulling away from me as if you don't want a hug. So what's the deal? The person was unable to do that in terms of the rules of the relationship. And then if that persisted over time, then that became a pattern. And there was no way, and it would also happen within the context of an important relationship that couldn't be left, like a parent. Okay, so when we think about that process in relation to children who are caught up in alienation processes, we get a triadic view of the double bind, which is that the alienating parent starts there at the top. Alienating parent feels a threat. That might be the threat of the other parent wanting contact. The targeted parent is always there, always present in the relationship, and connoted as dangerous. So they're always psychologically there, whether they're physically there or not. They're psychologically present, and they are connoted to the child as dangerous. And this threat then becomes exaggerated and is communicated to the child. So it's a distortion. And it doesn't matter about the child's actual experience of that other parent. If the distortion is such that it obliterates, if you like, their actual experience and replaces that with the alienating parent's experience. So in this distortion, here comes the primary instruction. Go and see your other parent. You'll have a good time. But I can't protect you. And this is the beginning of the splitting, of the dichotomous thinking. My parent, who's supposed to protect me, is telling me to go into a dangerous situation. Then there's this unspoken instruction. They're dangerous. By the way, I can't be in the same room with them, and they might try and take you away. Although these things are not spoken out loud, but they are implied. They might, I might not see you again. I won't be there to protect you. Whatever the message is, it comes through with an emphasis on fear. This child has not got the neurological equipment to resolve this confusion. So child is on their own. You're on your own, mate. So what does the child do? I've decided by myself, I'm not going to go. All by myself, I've decided. And again, I know that people watching this will be very familiar with this phenomenon. Then the targeted parent has a choice. Either they fight for contact or they withdraw. Often people consider withdrawing because they can see how distressed and how distressing it is for the child. So they might want to give the child time, just give them time and they'll come around. And we all know that doesn't work. Or they fight for contact. So that's the kind of, I'll see you in court. So that point, we move to the completion of the circle. The alienating parent takes that move as proof of the lack of love, no matter which choice is taken. You see, your other parent doesn't love you. If they really loved you, they'd keep fighting to see you. Or look what that other parent is doing to us now. They're taking us back to court. And then the alienating parent and the child are drawn closer together, and the targeted parent is further excluded. So moving on to think about family scripts. This is another systemic concept. So we're doing 3 systemic concepts: triangulation, double bind, and now family scripts. And family scripts are rules for parenting, which come down through the generation. And they particularly are organized around how to deal with danger. They are passed through the generations either consciously, this is what you do in a dangerous situation, or that can be through family stories, or unconsciously through actions when we just see what our parents do and we copy that, sometimes without. It becomes a procedural response, like riding a bike. It's what we do when we're in a situation. Now, scripts, there are 2 kinds of scripts mainly. They can be replicative, which is you repeat what happened in your situation, your generation, you repeat it in the next generation. That can come down through. Or they can be corrective, so that you are trying to make right something that wasn't comfortable or wasn't right when you were growing up. Both replicative and corrective scripts keep you stuck in the past. So we tend to think that if someone has suffered abuse in their childhood, physical abuse, say, being beaten, that it's much better for them to have a corrective script because they're determined not to put their child through that. However, very often people with the corrective script don't know what to do to correct it. They don't know how to deal with the conflict that the child brings. They don't know how to deal with discipline. So it can be just as much stuck in the past as the replicative script. However, the aim, and we have John Bing Hall to thank for this, the aim of script theory is to be free enough to improvise. So you want to be able to do the right thing for the moment. So to choose from the strategy is available to you. Sometimes the most appropriate thing in the moment is to be in your head and to say, I'm perfectly fine, even though you're not. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Sometimes the most appropriate thing is to say, actually, I'm not fine at all, and I really need some help here. When you're in that B category, you can use both. Okay, so it's being free enough to improvise. So this is where attachment and family therapy kind of overlap. Every strategy is good for some situation. So we're going to move on to think about families in conflict and the work around specific difficulties in communication. And the aim is to try and get communication back on track so that it's not making things worse or sustaining the difficulties. So I use John Gottman's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And these are 4 communication techniques, if you like, which are prevalent in conflictual communication. So the first is criticism. This is a C strategy, okay? And it's different from offering a critique or voicing a complaint. And criticism is an attack on the person. It's attack on the other person at the core of their character. The important thing is to learn the difference between expressing a complaint and making a criticism. So this is taken from John Gottman's website, which I've given you the link for at the bottom. So he gives examples. So the complaint is, I was scared when you were running late and didn't call me, although I thought we had agreed that we would do that for each other. That's a complaint. The criticism is, you never think about how your behavior is affecting other people. I don't believe that you're forgetful. You're just selfish. You never think of others. You never think of me. There are times when we all use criticism when we're not at our best. But if it becomes pervasive, it's when it becomes the modus operandi, that it paves the way for the other, what Gottman calls the far deadlier horsemen, to follow, makes the person feel attacked, assaulted, rejected, and hurt. And it often causes the perpetrator and victim to fall into an escalating pattern where the first horseman reappears with greater and greater frequency and intensity, which eventually leads to the next one, which is contempt. Now, the picture on this slide will be universally recognizable by any human on this planet. That is the face of contempt. And it's the second horseman. And it isn't, so it doesn't need to be, a word does not need to be spoken. It's a look. And it is also words. So this style of communication is deeply disrespectful. Contempt treats others with disrespect, mocks them with sarcasm, ridicules, calls them names, and mimics or uses body language such as eye rolling, scoffing, and the target, the person on the receiving end, is made to feel really despised and worthless. So criticism attacks your partner's character. Contempt assumes a position of moral superiority over them. I remember my daughter once saying to me, she was about 13, when we were having an argument about something, and I said to her, "I told you till I'm blue in the face." And she very superiorly said to me, "Just tell me one time you've actually gone blue in the face, mother." And that is, she nearly died that day, but never mind, she didn't, and we survived, and we don't talk to each other like that anymore, and we didn't as an ongoing thing. But here on this slide is an example of criticism, of contempt. So research shows that couples that are contemptuous of each other are more likely to become ill than others due to weakened immune systems. Contempt is fueled by long simmering negative thoughts about the other person. They come to a head when the perpetrator attacks the accused from a position of relative superiority. Interestingly, contempt is the greatest predictor of divorce. And the response to contempt is often defensiveness. And defensiveness can be used either by people using A strategies or people using C strategies. So this third horseman is typically a response to criticism. It's a common reaction, and it's nearly omnipresent when relationships are really on the rocks. So when we feel unjustly accused, we fish for excuses and play the innocent victim so that the other one will back off. This strategy is almost never successful. Excuses just tell the other person that I don't care about you. You know, there is a justification for mistakes. So here's an example given by Gottman. Did you call Betty and Ralph to let them know that we're not coming tonight as you promised this morning? And the defensive response is, I was just too darn busy today. As a matter of fact, you know how busy my schedule was. Why didn't you just do it? So in that communication, the other person not only responds defensively, but they reverse the blame in an attempt to make it the other person's fault. So a non-defensive response can express acceptance of responsibility, admission of fault, and an understanding of the other person's perspective. Sometimes just being able to take a deep breath and standing back is really important to think about, what do I want to get out of this conversation? Okay. And then maybe you can find yourself in a place to say, oops, I forgot. I should have asked you this morning to do it because I knew my day would be packed. And it's my fault. So let's call them right now. And finally, we come to the last of the four horsemen, which is an A pattern. And it's stonewalling. And again, I know that people watching this will have experienced this. It's a response usually to contempt. And it occurs when the listener withdraws from the interaction, just shuts down, just doesn't respond to their partner. And rather than confronting the issues, people who stonewall can make evasive maneuvers, such as tuning out, turning away, acting busy, engaging in obsessive or distracting behaviors. I need to go paint my toenails, whatever. When stonewalling becomes pervasive, and it's interesting that Gottman notes that it's often learned in childhood and where children observe it on a regular basis, it can become a bad habit. Stonewalling isn't easy to stop. It's a result of feeling physiologically flooded. And when we stonewall, we may not even be in a physiological state where we can discuss things rationally. And that the neurobiological research definitely supports that. And it helps to ask for timeout. Just take timeout. Gottman suggests 20 minutes. Take that time just to do something on your own, just to go for a walk, just to clear your head, get your body back, get your breathing regulated, and stop feeling so overwhelmed. And then come back to the conversation when you feel you're ready. It's just, I just need 5 minutes to get my head together. It can be really helpful. Now, these 4 patterns are ones that we see all the time in the alienation process. And it's not just in face-to-face, person-to-person communication, but also where parents are separated. It can be in texts and in emails and in other forms of electronic communication. And those communications can exacerbate attachment wounds in a very profound way. They make the other person feel more hurt and more misunderstood. And it's just layering upon layer upon layer of attachment injury. So when we're working with families who are caught up in this kind of horrible communication, we ask them to show us, run past us. I know you've had this email communication. Run your response by me. Let's have a look at it together, and let me see if I can help. And it happens so often that someone will write a really nice response to a request or to a demand, or however you want to look at it. And at the end of it will say, like you always do. And that just completely wipes out, or words to that effect, which completely wipe out everything that went before. Might as well not have said it. So some examples are the criticism, I'm only asking for X, and as usual, you do X, okay? Or contempt, and I actually saw a text from a 13-year-old child, he's a 12-year-old child, to his mother a few days ago, which said, "Why did you come, you retard? And for your information, I'm not coming tomorrow, not in a million years." And then the stonewalling, the complaint that the other parent never responds. I wrote to him or her a week ago, and they just ignore me. We see it a lot. Okay. So how do we intervene? So we're trying to do a multi-level intervention with the individual, the parent-child situation, and the child themselves. Increasingly, I am trying to recruit a team around the family. People that I work with are really, I work with other really trusted professionals, and we can share the work in a way that's going to be helpful to the family and also helpful to us to really understand what's happening. So the intervention is based on setting realistic expectations. We're not going to try and change the world, but we will try and manage to get things to a better, to the extent that the child can have a reasonable relationship with both parents, that the child can experience their other parent in a positive way, or at least a neutral way. And we say at the beginning, there's no guarantee of success, but we'll work very hard to try and get there. So in order to do that, we first of all identify through a therapeutic process, the process of doing the adult attachment interview, or the family attachment interview, which is a newer one, is in itself a therapeutic process. People often say, oh, I never thought about that before, or that's interesting that I wonder what that means. So we identify the attachment styles, either the A, minimizing and down regulating, or the C, upregulating and upregulating and becoming disfluent and dysfunctional. So we identify the attachment styles, and then we also look whether at the dangers that the person's identified, and if those dangers constitute traumas that are unresolved and have been brought forward from childhood. And I could give you many examples of situations where the alienating parent has got a massive unresolved childhood trauma. In fact, it's very unusual for them not to. And how those traumas are being reenacted in the present. So we will often track an episode, which means really taking it apart, a bit like that double bind process slide. So it's really looking at, well, what happened next? And then what happened? And then what happened? And what happened next? And then going back to that and thinking about, well, what did you think? And what did you feel? So looking at trying to integrate thinking and feeling during those times. We look at coaching and rehearsal, getting people to rehearse with us how they might put a difficulty to their partner, their ex-partner, or how they might try and describe a problem, or how they might try and make a request. But so we'll do some coaching and some rehearsal with them. And try and get them to open possibilities. So we'll ask questions like, well, what if you were to take this approach? Or what do you think would happen if? So we're not making prescriptions, but we're trying to open possibilities. So think about things in many different ways. And then there's the psychoeducation that goes along with this, which is firstly making sure people know about the impact of alienation and dichotomous thinking on children's development. The outcome research is pretty devastating. And we use, in the psychoeducation, we use media clips, we use stories. There are a number of external resources that we can use, that we have. And we're adding to that all the time. Also with children, it's really helping them to get to develop critical thinking, which is a way of taking them outside of themselves. So we're not necessarily focusing on their particular situation, but on a more hypothetical situation. And, questions like, is it ever right to tell a lie? Etc. Critical thinking can be really helpful. Okay, so I want to move on to give you a case example. And this is the bees, and they're a family. And I got involved following a court assessment, which found alienation and recommended therapy. Okay, the assessment was done by a psychologist with some knowledge of alienation, and that psychologist recommended family therapy. The family is an Asian family, and it was an arranged marriage. They have one child, a boy who's now 11 years old when I became involved with the family. The divorce happened 5 years ago, when the child was 6, and there has been no contact at all for 4 years. That's not quite true. There was a disastrous attempt at contact, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So the attachment issues for the mother. So from her family attachment interview, she's the middle child of 7 children. There were 3 girls and 4 boys. She had a number of significant childhood memories. It was a traditional family arrangement. The father works outside the home, the mother works inside the home, mainly with the childcare. In her family, there was a connection, there was a real emphasis on connection and care and being together, being part of the group and really being valued as a person and just being part of the group. There was low conflict among the parents. And the mother was highly valued, not only for what she did for the children, but also how she supported the husband, the father. There was low conflict among siblings. Mother told me, oh, we might argue for a couple of minutes, but then within 5 minutes, we'd all be back together. And she could give some examples of that. And the siblings sorted it out with very little parental interference. Her memories focused on play and being part of the group. But she also had some really lovely memories of her father oiling her hair and cleaning her shoes. She had this lovely memory of this kind of service and caring that her father did with the children. It felt very personal and very specific to the person too. She didn't report any dangers from which she was not protected or comforted. So every child, as I said, faces some kind of danger, but there were none that she didn't receive comfort from. As an adult, she trained as a medical doctor, and she was in that training when she had not quite finished that training when the marriage occurred. And she had a replicative script. She was happy with what her parents did, and she didn't want to do anything different. Okay, so the father, similarly, large family, is the 4th child of 6 children. So he was the 4th child, and there were 4 boys in the family and 2 girls. He had some significant childhood memories. It was a traditional family arrangement, like the mother, but in his family, the father made all the decisions, and the mother would just rubber stamp them, I guess. There was a huge emphasis on achievement, what the children achieved. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. There was very little parental conflict because the father made all the decisions and the mother acquiesced to those. His memories really focused on pleasing the parents, doing things that made them happy. And he had a highly idealized parental relationship with his parents, highly idealized. Again, there were no reported dangers from which he was not protected. So as an adult, he had a very high achieving career, that should say career and not carer. He has high achieving siblings, and he also had a replicative script. All his siblings had gone on to become high achievers as well. And he has a replicative script, as I say. Here's an example. This is one of the questions from the family attachment interview. Okay. So going back to your family of origin, how would you describe the relationships within your family? Loving. I would say loving, supporting everyone, to be honest, and we cherished each of our achievements in life. I mean, the whole family. I still remember, in my university life, and I had positions in class, like first position, second position in second year, and when it came back home, everybody, the house was so joyful. And I go on to ask another question, which is how did your parents work together to meet your needs, say for comfort, if you needed comfort? How did that feel? What were they doing? Now, I invite you to remember the questions about comfort. And he started it by talking about his mother giving him comfort because it was like the household chore, and the chore was done by the mother. And like but then he changes track. If I had some achievement at school, I come back and the dad will hug me first, saying, "Bravo, my bravo child." And the mum will start crying. And yeah, to be honest, I still remember those when I stood second in my university. Yeah, it was my degree's second year, and I went from that something to just see the joy and happiness on my parents' faces, because I knew how hard it is for them to earn a livelihood. And then when they know that their child has stood first in the university, how I want to see the glow on their faces. And I still remember my mum's, eyes coming from here when I told that your child has stood first in the university. And this is a university which is ranked top where I come from. And she couldn't stop, crying, to be honest, doctor. I still remember those glowing faces, both of my parents, when I see that when they see that their children succeed. And I told you before, whenever she was tired, she will started singing for the success of her children. So it's a highly idealized situation where achievement is the most important thing. Okay, so thinking about the pre-intervention history, as I said, there'd been no contact for 4 years since a divorce in the country of origin and in the UK. And they'd just recently been in court, as I said, and the judgment that the judge made was very critical of the mother, one of the most critical ones I've seen. And interestingly, it's a female judge from the same cultural background. She made findings of alienation. She dismissed the coercive control and physical abuse allegations of the mother. And she was critical of triangulating the mother's triangulating the child by letting him have too much information about court. The mother later told me that the child, who's 11, he's a very bright boy, had got access to her computer and had found it. And she's, had found the court documents and found it himself. And she's since put a block on the computer. Then there was a threat on behalf of the judge to place the child in care if contact was not reinstated with the father. I was blessed in the work by having a very helpful court officer, CAFCAS it's called in the United Kingdom. And there had been, before I got involved, one disastrous attempt at contact where the child had had very little preparation. The mother, when she left, had when the mother had left, she was very fearful of abduction of the child, and therefore she was very secretive about where they were. I'll say a bit more about that later. But the father, in his wish just to know things about he was so pleased to actually see the child. The contact was held on the Zoom, and it was because the father was in another country, and it was done, as I say, with very little preparation of either the child or the father. The father was asking all sorts of questions. Is your mother working? Does she drive? Has she got a car? And it just freaked the kid out, and he just disengaged. So that was what I inherited. So the intervention with the mother. We did the family attachment interview. She's got, her history is playful, this idea about egalitarianism, that boys and girls were equally valued and included, that the family was really inclusive. And there was a demonstration of love through action. And her experience of the marriage was that she felt controlling, she felt very criticized, she wasn't good enough, and she felt that she was held back developmentally because she wasn't able to complete her medical degree. She felt that she could never please him or his family, that they were always critical of anything that she did, the food that she prepared or the things that she bought for the child. The history of the separation was fear of his family and their intrusiveness, and her real wish for privacy and to be, well, she was basically stonewalling. She also feared that they would, if they knew where the family were, where she and her son were, there was a fear of abduction. So then we moved on to a review of how we got to be here and acknowledging the impact on her of the courts and the judgment, which was so damaging and so critical of her, and her fears about that. What could she do that was right? And then really thinking about her hopes and wishes for her son. She could see that her son, especially now that he's becoming as he's growing, becoming more mature. He's in his last year of primary school, so he would be moving on to secondary school, and she could see the need for his father to be involved with him. The father also had access to the school, so he was getting the school records, and the school was communicating with him. That it was important for her and for the child that she continued to be included in the process and included to have the confirmation of her importance to her son and a validation of the good care she had taken of him during those years. And also at the same time, how it had restricted him by not having access to his father. The intervention with the father, again, the family attachment interview and the history of the focus on achievement and doing well and how important that was, and also duty to parents was an important part of his background, that you had a duty, you had rights, but you also had duties to your parents. And his description of the marriage was that it was all fine until she got UK citizenship, and then she went independent, and there was a lot of distrust. I mean, that was a very superficial description, but it was his description. There was a lot of distrust, and she didn't fit in with the expectations of his family, and there was still ongoing criticism of her. The history of the separation was that she disappeared. She just disappeared with the child without warning. She couldn't be found. And then she was found but refused contact. Actually, they knew that she had gone back to her family of origin, but there was a wall around her, a wall of protection around her and the child at that time, so he couldn't get access to them. Okay, and then when they came back to the UK, the mother and son, they went underground. Okay. So the intervention at the beginning was on coaching, how to talk to the child after such a long gap. So not to be asking those questions which were experienced as intrusive, but to have genuine curiosity about who the child was, what kind of a person he is, what's he developing, what's he interested in, all of that, and taking it one step at a time, because as is common in these situations, one part of the system wants it to go very slowly, and the other part wants it to go really fast, and we had to slow it down. Okay. So the intervention with the child. This is a very intelligent, bright, and quite cheeky 11-year-old who I like very much. He said to me that the court officer, the Kafkas officer as it's called here, had told him he had to see his father and he didn't have any choice. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, but I have conditions. Okay. So what were your conditions? What are his conditions? Well, he didn't want the father to see his face. Okay. So we had arranged that my preparation of the child for contact, I felt that it was very important for me to, if I set a boundary, to really stick to it, absolutely stick to it. And I promised him There would never be any surprises. I would never just suddenly appear with the father and that he, surprise. There would never be any of that kind of surprise where I couldn't, that he wasn't expecting. And we really worked on building trust. So I saw him on several occasions with his mother. I visited him at home. I saw him with his mother, and I saw him separately. And the deal was it would be 20 minutes. We agreed 20 minutes. And he didn't want his father to see his face. So I said, well, what about we make a mask? And he thought about this for a minute, and then he agreed. And he said, and so I took a picture of his face and I blew it up and I cut it out and made little slits in the eyes and stuck it on a stick, and he could hold it up. And it was a very expressionless mask. And he could hold it up in front of the Zoom camera so that his father wouldn't see his actual face, but could see a photo of his face with no expression. We also had several sessions reviewing his memories, and these were photographs the father sent me from when he was obviously a much younger child, and sort of thinking about his memories. And he did have some good memories of his father and of them being a family together. He also had some bad memories, but he was allowing the good memories to come, which I felt very optimistic about. The mother was also helpful with photos. And so our agreement was that we would have contact on Zoom with his father, who was living abroad and working abroad. It would be 20 minutes and no longer. And we did that. We did that 3 times. And after, so we had the first session, he held the mask up. His mother was in the house, but she was going up to an upstairs room where she would have her headphones on and be on her computer, and she was not listening. And I felt very confident about that. And she saw the mask and she said, "Don't be silly, he's your father," which was perfect, because then he could see his father without the mask, and that was good. So the first few sessions, of course, the first 2 sessions, he sat absolutely rigidly, and it was yes, no answers, and it was very painful. And then he started to warm up a bit. And then it became close to a holiday time, and we started to think about face-to-face contact. So I also met with each parent during this time. I met with each parent separately, and then we did have a joint meeting. And the joint meeting went very well. I always set ground rules, which are we behave with respect to each other, we allow people to finish their sentences, and most importantly, if we need time out, anyone can ask for time out. If we begin to get dysregulated or feel the temperature, emotional temperature going up, we can ask for time out, and that includes me. Okay. And we didn't need to do that. They were able to have a meeting together, which was very positive and very businesslike. That's the other ground rule. We stick to business. We don't try and solve the past, but we stick to business. And so we agreed that we would ease into more contact. So we had, because it's a Muslim family, and Eid was coming, we agreed that the father would come to England and would take the son to the local mosque. So it was a 5-minute walk to the mosque, and then a half an hour or so of prayer time, and then a 5-minute walk back. And he did that 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row for 2 weeks, and that was going well. Then I had the first family session with the father and the son, and the father had brought him a lot of presents. And he brought him some football presents, and the child loves football, and he was really excited to get them, the boy. And he'd also brought some dates for the mother, a present for the mother. So we had that first session, which went very well, and so well, in fact, that the child allowed the father to have his picture taken with the son. So I took a picture of them on the father's phone. Okay. Then the mother came in, and the father left. Mother came in, and we gave some feedback to mother about, and the child was really excited. However, the look on the mother's face when she saw the presents was somewhat akin to the look on the slide a few slides back, with the look of contempt. And it was like an unconscious thing. She almost couldn't help herself. So that was my first marker of, oh dear, one step forward, 2 steps back. But then we did build the contact, the mosque, the gifts, and then it moved to outings. So he was able to take the child for a walk around the lake that's near their home. And then he was able to take the child for a shopping trip. And then a few weeks later, he was able to take the child to Legoland. So it was getting more and more. And I got very positive feedback from that, both from the child and from the father. But as is often the situation in these situations, there were mistakes. One mistake was taking the picture, because the father immediately put it on his social media. I'm with my son. I'm so happy. I'm with my son. And here he is. And that was a big mistake, because of course the child found out, and his loyalty to his mother was such that he would not from then on allow himself to be photographed with his father. And that included the trip to Legoland. There was also some putting right in the sessions between the father and the child. There was some putting right of the misinformation that he'd had, or the misconstruing of information that he'd had. And that was helpful. Then there was a session that I had with him and the father that went really well. And then after the father left, I had 20 minutes with the child. And in that 20 minutes, he said, this was after the Legoland visit too, and it was so positive. And he said, no, I want it all to come to an end. I've had enough of it. I don't want, you promised only 20 minutes, and now it goes on for days. And so it was really my heart sank. And it was so different from the way he'd been with the father in the meeting just before. And he'd said to me, the child said, I don't like hurting people's feelings, so I don't want to tell him. And I said, well, we have to tell him. We have to tell him. So we arranged that the next meeting, we would have this conversation where we explained that he didn't want so much contact. He wanted 20 minutes of contact. So the next meeting happened after another outing that had been really positive. And I met with the father and the child, and I said, I'm afraid that the child has something that he wants me to help him to tell you. And the child completely backtracked. And he said, no, it was only 20 minutes with me that he didn't want anymore, or that he wanted to stick with 20 minutes with me and not have the hour session. And so it was so clear that he was so caught in this loyalty trap between the mother and the father. But I think that the mother had actually given him permission to have time with the father. And the further work with the mother, which happened in between the sessions, was really about that. Because she was saying, her feedback was saying to me, was saying that the child is complaining all the time, that he doesn't want to spend the time with his father. Of course, he was complaining because he knew that the mother wanted to hear that, or he felt that the mother wanted to hear that, or he felt that he was being disloyal to the mother by enjoying the time with his father. However, it went back to court when it was supposed to. There was another hearing. I fed back to the court officer. I fed back everything. Not the absolute detail of the therapy, but pretty much as I'm telling you now. And in the court, they were able to agree that the father would move back to England, and he had bought another house, not in the same neighborhood, but close, and that they would share the time with the child. So that is the work in process, and they're continuing to work with me. It's about to start up again. There's been a bit of a break while he extricates himself from the country of where he's working at the moment. So I'm very pleased to say it because it's, fingers crossed, all moving in the right direction. And that's the end of my presentation. So here are some resources if you want to have a look for working with parents. There's a couple of YouTube things. And I hope that my presentation has been of some interest. Thank you.
On our next episode of Families Divided TV, Dr. Stan Carosi discusses de-ideologizing and de-alienation, empowering the alienated parent.